Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. I'm a psychological astrologer. And oh, it's one of those wonderful days because I have got Melanie Reinhart with me today. Hello, Melanie.
Hi, Anna. It's always great to look forward to a conversation with you.
It's such a joy. I get so excited. I nearly tripped in saying your name. Oh, so well, I couldn't resist inviting you back because I've had many guests talking about Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius and all sorts of other um, astrological fun. And, but I haven't had anyone actually talked about Chiron in Aries. Of course, we're right in the middle of it, it seems.
Yeah.
What with Jupiter conjuncting Chiron very soon and the North Node going into Aries later this year, I thought it would be wonderful to have a little chat about Chiron in Aries.
Right, yes. Yes, it's in a very interesting place at the moment, Chiron, because on May the 27th, 2021, Chiron reached the furthest point in its orbit away from the sun. So it's kind of the furthest out that it goes in its orbit. And I just find the symbolism of that just very touching, because the orbits of all the centaurs, including Chiron, are very elliptical. In fact, all of the orbits of the planets are elliptical to one degree or another. So that means they're not geometrically round, but they're like a kind of flattened out circle a bit. I'm sort of doing it here with my hands a little bit. And so they all have points in their orbits where they're closest into the sun, and pretty much opposite that is a point where they're furthest away from the sun. And, you know, looking at the orbits of the centaurs, it's almost like the movement is, this is how it looks to me. This is not, scientific astronomy or anything, but how it looks is that they're kind of straining to make contact with the sun. And that works so beautifully in terms of the meaning of the centaurs, and specifically Chiron, who was actually in the mythology, he was fostered by Apollo, the sun god, who taught him many different skills and mentored him. And he in turn mentored many of the Greek heroes. So it's as if, well, what preceded that in the story, which is quite well known, is so Chiron was the son of the god Kronos, who's astrological Saturn, and a nymph called Philyra. And they met when both of them were in their horse form, because we know that the gods can shapeshift, And so when Chiron was born, he came out half horse and half human. And his nymph mother, Philyra, was so horrified at how he looked, in other words, like a hybrid monster, that she prayed to the gods to be made into anything other than what she was, seeing herself, as it were, as the mother of a monster. And so the gods obliged and turned her into a linden tree. And in ancient European mythology, the linden tree was actually associated with divination. And anyway, so meanwhile, Chiron was abandoned. And in the time-honored manner of myth and legend, he was rescued by a shepherd and taken to Apollo, who took him on and fostered him. So in other words, Chiron begins his life abandoned by both of the parents. To my knowledge, and if somebody knows different, please correct me here. But to my knowledge, there was no relationship between Kronos, Saturn, and Chiron ever. I don't know of any source where there is one, so please enlighten me if there is. But in any case, he was abandoned so early, and there's no record of any future contact with Kronos, Saturn, his father, that we can consider him as like an orphan, motherless and fatherless, and taken on by the sun god Apollo. I find this very touching, because if we look at that symbolically, the condition of being like an orphan, of being motherless and fatherless, can also be a feeling state, a felt state, even if we have two living parents. And even if we get on well with our parents, this very painful feeling of being like an exile or an outsider, or an outlier, all of those conditions belong to the Chiron archetype. But of course, what we also know, and Jung wrote quite a lot about this, is that feeling of being abandoned, of being motherless and fatherless, is almost a herald of the process of individuation, meaning our becoming a true individual. Because to do that, there's a level of separation from each of our parents, which is required. And sometimes it happens gradually and naturally. Sometimes it happens through a disaster, a big shock, maybe with their early deaths, or sometimes we leave home early to get away from them. So the variations are endless, but the theme remains constant. It's a very deep letting go of the parental archetypes. So Chiron's journey facilitates this. And by transit, we can see that through the horoscope. And therefore also, it brings to light the kind of patterns, sometimes painful patterns, which may still tie us into one or both parents, or indeed the family structure in general. So as it goes round the horoscope, it's like Chiron puts a spotlight on those areas, possibly bringing them to consciousness for the very first time. But it is fundamentally a healing process. And so to me, going back to this image of Chiron's orbit in the heavens, it's as if when Chiron is out at perihelion, it's furthest away from the sun. We could maybe translate that into being furthest away from our own sense of center, our own internal luminosity, and the place within us which can receive energy from source. And it's a very painful thing to be alienated from that. Very painful, even though it can also be a very private experience. You know, we can look fine and people think we're fine, and we'll even say we're fine. But inside, particularly around the heart, because the sun is associated with the heart through the sign of Leo, there can be an aching emptiness and longing for something that we can't even define, which we can also project out onto all kinds of things. You know, if only I had more money, I wouldn't feel this emptiness. Or if only I felt more accepted, or if I could make my mark on the world, or all these kind of things. Or if I have a partner, all of the longings that we have are ultimately kind of superseded by the longing to connect with our own internal, deeper source. And this too is very relevant to now, because ever since the 1960s, and the musical Hair, even people who completely dismiss astrology have known the catchphrase, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, right? And there are numerous ideas about exactly when that starts, enough to fill 3 pages in one of Nick Campion's books, the one called Mundane Astrology, if anyone's interested to look that up. It's amazing. And a huge span of different dates. It's 1,500 years worth of different dates by experts who've all claimed this is when it's going to happen. You know, myself, I don't bother too much about exactly when it's going to start, because I think movements on that kind of scale are, you know, have to be a bit of a movable feast. But I think it's a feeling and a kind of internal awakening. And that'll happen on an individual level, as well as being reflected out there in the collective and in the world. But opposite the sign of Aquarius is the sign of Leo. And Leo rules the heart, and that fits in with the symbolism to do with Chiron that I've just been speaking about. So Chiron reaches its perihelion in Aries. Very interesting. Aries is ruled by Mars, and it is a sign that's very active and also reactive, and an energy with powerful impulses and a powerful urge to go forward and to achieve and so forth. At its best, Aries is somebody who can take fast, inspired action that's effective in accomplishing whatever it is that's at hand, you know. And on the difficult side of Aries, it can be very reactive. So it will act first and think last, and not stay around to take responsibility for the consequences. Or that latter thing, in terms of positive Aries. Aries doesn't really hang around to take credit for things and so forth. Does like to win battles. And one of the big lessons in the sign of Aries, we could say, is the discernment about which battles really are worth fighting and which are not. And that is such a huge theme on the earth at the moment. It's like, where do we put that Mars energy of ours? And over the last few months, of course, there's been a whole retrograde loop of Mars, bringing the opportunity for us to question, you know, what am I doing with my energy? And is there some way that that could be refined or deepened? Because having a strong Mars can also help one to survive in a world like it is now, with so many different opinions and positions and beliefs and styles and everything, and everybody claiming to be right, okay? Or trying to convince us that they're right, so follow me and that kind of thing. So that warrior energy of Aries is very powerful in that sense, because it helps things to just kind of bounce off us and we can keep going on our own track. So this association with the warrior archetype is really interesting to inquire into. One of the things I've definitely noticed since Chiron went into Aries first, which was February of 2019, I mean, it'll stay there until May of 2027, that the general public awareness of the horrors of war is coming very much up to the surface. Now, on one level, the horrors of war have always been known. And yet it's almost like the awareness has more or less stopped at the horror and not gone any further to really recognize the degree of trauma that is suffered by people who, not only those who fight in the war, but who are involved with it in any way, including civilians who are caught up in it. Absolutely massive. So the work of various stellar people to bring awareness to what's now being called the trauma-informed world is just huge at the moment. And to give some names on that, which I imagine many of you who are watching this is old news to you already, but highly recommend the work of Gabor Mate and also Daniel Four. His speciality is also ancestral work. And there's another name that I'm losing at the moment, but there were three people I wanted to mention. Anyway, if you just Google around and also on YouTube, you'll find that, definitely. And so there's more awareness being brought to the really, really harmful side of war, and the whole notion of what is a hero is coming under scrutiny, because many times people go to war with actually misguided ideas about what it is they're doing and for why.
I think just listening to you, there's so much, as always, to think about. And I think Aries is also about self-agency and independence. But crucially, for me, it's also about courage.
Yeah.
And I think the sun as an archetype is also about courage because it's linked with the hero.
Yes.
And you think Chiron, if we just forget about the signs and we think about Chiron being at its furthest from the sun. So if we think about Chiron fostered by Apollo and imagine him going out into the world to discover himself and its furthest reaches of the sun. But we know, we can remember being baby adults, can't we? Those of us who are no longer in that stage of life, we can remember what that feels like. And although it's a tremendously exciting, this great adventure in which we are discovering ourselves, it's also a time when we're secretly yearning for that security of the mentors that we once had. And I'm thinking particularly, when we leave university, those of us who go to university, or if we're, for those who don't go to university, leaving secondary school. And there's that security of knowing what each day will bring, and that there's somebody else going to take responsibility if things go wrong. And suddenly that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think about that journey, and now you add Aries into the mix, and Aries is about courage. So I think what I'm feeling with Chiron in Aries is that there seems to be a wound to courage in many cases, and a wound to the ability to strike out confidently on our own. And certainly there does seem to be a great deal of pressure for us to relinquish our personal agency to supposedly higher authorities. And I feel with Chiron in Aries that actually we're discovering that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
And I can't help feel that there's something in this period of Chiron in Aries where we're being prodded to discover our own personal courage and our own personal agency, where perhaps we had been willingly giving too much of it away at the point of risking losing it all together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Particularly with Pluto being in Capricorn. I think the two have, it's that Pluto top down. You will do it like this.
Yeah.
You silly you know, pat on the head. We'll throw you into the sin bin if you don't do as you're told anyway, because actually we all know so much better than you.
Yeah.
And there's Chiron and Aries going, oh, is that true? that hurts. Where do I stand on this? What do I want to do about this? Do I want to fight for this as well?
Yes, yes, absolutely. What also occurs to me about the Chiron in Aries is there's something about the way that we're all trained, and this I think is particularly and rather tragically true for men, that we're all trained to cover and hide or even repress altogether our vulnerability. And so the true warrior is someone who has a good contact with their own vulnerability. And so if vulnerability is projected out, but we deny it, then we can fear other people because of what's projected onto them, and even become hostile and aggressive because of what we've projected on them and want to get rid of in us. So, but I loved your phrase, self-agency. That's so important. And I think that even extends into which level of the self we are rendering capable of agency. Because, you know, the word self covers so many different things and can mean so many different things. But if we parse that out a bit, we all have what's called an ego. But what we actually mean by that word can vary quite a lot. And typically it gets disparaged. To me, the simplest way to understand the ego is that it's like a collection of patterns that were laid down in the past in relationship to our parents, others in the family, or any influential adults in our formative years. And it creates responses that may at one time have been totally appropriate, but that get crystallized and outlive their usefulness and then become barriers that hold us back. And so it's a very crystallized, rigid kind of structure. And it's also very reactive. So when we're triggered by anything, really, that's usually something in our ego structures that's calling our attention to it. And it's, of course, incredibly easy to just throw blame out at other people. So that's one level of the self, the ego self. And then there's what is sometimes called the higher self. And that's discovering that is very much part of the journey of individuation related to the sun and the heart. And that's more what happens when we become aware that as the ego self, we, you know, as the ego self, we always want to be the center of the universe. And we want everybody to do what we want them to do and think how we think and all of that. So that includes what's often called the narcissistic pathology, but which is also often maligned. But no need to malign any of these levels, because it's just levels of development. But the higher self is a place within us, so to speak, where we recognize that we're not the only ones in the world or the universe. And progressively we can feel and experience ourselves as part of something greater. That is really an awesome thing to tap into. And that can even extend into realizing how the universe that we are part of very often arranges things, so to speak, in an optimum way for our benefit, actually. It's incredible if you really look at what happens. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen all the time, but there is a real current of congruence once you start to live from that place of self-realization. And the sun, which we've been referring to a lot, is so-called exalted in the sign of Aries. And that's a traditional astrological term, which basically means that the planet operates in an optimal way through that particular sign. And so in the sign of Aries, the sun can be a point of heartfulness, of a magnanimity and a generosity and a willingness to include others. And, you know, even though there's so much horrible stuff happening in the world and so much suffering at the moment, there is also an amazing amount of magnanimity, I always stumble on that word, and generosity of spirit. And of course, that doesn't necessarily make the headlines, more's the pity. But you don't have to look far to find that. It's just absolutely amazing. So, little more about Chiron specifically in Aries. So because Chiron's cycle is just over 50 years, it was last in Aries from April 1968 to April 1977. And prior to that, it was actually at the end of the First World War. So around the, certainly it was at its aphelion in 1920. And so a few years before that, it would have gone into Aries. And there have been major wars in all those periods. There's World War I, then the Vietnam War, and now there seems to be war pretty much everywhere. Well, that's an exaggeration, but there is a lot going on.
And different types of war,
Yes.
I would say.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
not purely kinetic warfare. There is psychological war
Yes.
being
Thanks,
as well.
thanks for bringing that in. That is really important.
I've been thinking a lot about Aries and Mars being about defense as well.
Yes.
There does seem, if we're talking about wounds, areas of society that are wounded, there does seem to be an emphasis on the police one way or another. And with, for instance, calls to defund the police.
Mm.
And not quite knowing what to do with the military. Do we want the military? Don't we want the military? As well as a deep sensitivity about the legitimacy of sending our young out to fight without there being a very clear purpose. So there seems to be a lot that's going on around the notion of defense and boundaries as well.
Yes, and so you mentioned earlier on about the conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron. And just to say, this is a really interesting time to be focusing on that conjunction, because it becomes exact on the 12th of March. But before that, sooner, at the moment, there is what's called a triple conjunction. So 3 planets very close together, all in Aries. And it's Venus and Jupiter and Chiron. And so on the 2nd of March, that's Venus conjunct Jupiter, and you will be able to see this in the sky. And then there's Venus conjunct Chiron the next day on the 3rd. That you won't be able to see that because Chiron's not visible with the naked eye. And then it's Jupiter with the conjunction to Chiron on the 3rd. So it's already been within range of conjunction for quite some weeks, and that will continue on for some weeks after. But the exact sort of ping date is the 12th. And what's also interesting about that to me is that it's part of this whole movement that's going on during March 2023, where both Saturn and also Pluto change their signs. And Saturn will go into Pisces on the 7th, and Pluto will go into Aquarius on the 23rd. So I think it makes sense to speak about those a little bit, because Jupiter, of course, was the traditional ruler of Pisces. And so Jupiter will be the ruler of Pisces, of Saturn in Pisces. And it's a very, very interesting placement. Saturn's cycle is about 29 years long. And so it was last in Pisces during the early 1990s. And there were many very deep changes that went on in the world around that time. You know, the Berlin Wall came down and apartheid was finally, they began to dismantle it. It's by no means finished, that process. But, Mandela was inaugurated as president, and many changes have happened. So in this new cycle, I think that the Pisces themes to do with borders and boundaries are going to meet us in all kinds of ways out there in the world. But I'd like to take a more internal view, because ultimately, well, to quote the master astrologer Dane Rudhyar, who's sometimes called the father of modern astrology, to quote him, he said, "Events do not happen to people. People happen to events." And that is such an incredibly challenging statement for all of us. And by the way, Rudhyar was an Aries himself. And that's such a powerful statement. Picking it apart a little bit, it does mean it's how we experience whatever happens to us that makes the experience what it is. And there's a great leeway of possibilities within that. So some people have the capacity to see humor in all kinds of things that other people just find seriously not funny, okay? And other people make an enormous drama out of things that are fairly transient and not terribly consequential, and a huge range in between. So what are we going to bring to the experience of Saturn in Pisces? Well, Pisces is ruled traditionally by Jupiter, and the modern ruler is Neptune. Two planets that really have a great sensitivity to them. It's a water sign, so it's very feeling. And at the highest level, it really brings forth our compassion. It's a watery energy that enables us to empathize with people and to understand what they are experiencing. So as we do that, our own boundaries widen as to what we feel able to respond in a heartful way to. And there might be many situations where we feel ourselves more sensitive even than usual. And this is not a reactive kind of sensitivity. It's more an empathic one. It's a quieter energy, but it can be an energy which is very demanding. So in the sign of Pisces, often there is an instinct to remove ourselves from the world, to be temporarily a hermit. I remember once a colleague of mine describing that process of, like, Pisces becomes waterlogged because of the sensitivity to the feelings of others. And so it then becomes like a sponge. And sometimes when you're using a sponge in life, you have to kind of pause and wring out the sponge and get rid of all the water so you can continue to absorb. So that wringing out of the sponge can often best happen in isolation. And that's not about, rejecting folk or turning your back on your friends and family and stuff. It's just about this very subtle boundary of knowing when you need time alone to dwell within your own psyche, listen to its rhythms, and respond to the guidance that will also come to you from within. And so finding out what can support us to go into that kind of nourishing hermit space. So not a hermit space where we feel alone and depressed and horrible, but a space where if those feelings come, we have a way of moving beyond them, or allowing the energy to move us beyond them would be a better way of putting it. So for me, it's usually music, sometimes poetry, but music will always do that for me, where I feel like I'm allowed to be in my own little bubble temporarily. And it's almost the feeling of being washed clean. So whatever washes the world away from us is a really useful, I was going to say skill, not really a skill because it comes by grace, but ways to invite that might be hugely useful during the next couple of years or so. And you might also be challenged in terms of boundaries of, there might be times when you really need to say no. Now, some people don't have a problem with that. Others do. So if you're in the latter group, I think the Saturn in Pisces will help with that, because it is also going to ask us for a lot of flexibility in terms of potential chaos in schedules and all those kind of things. So we cannot be rigid. So I think of it as like the sea pounding on the shore. It's actually subtly changing the boundaries.
It's interesting you talking about boundaries, because all the while I was listening to you, I was thinking about this. I was thinking about the Berlin Wall coming down, and what better symbol for Saturn in Pisces could there be than a wall being brought down, and thinking about boundaries, and just thinking about the tension between the boundlessness of Pisces. And let us remember, we have Neptune in Pisces
as well.
same time. So we're going through this period where we have Saturn in Pisces whilst Neptune's in Pisces, and Jupiter about to conjunct Chiron in Aries, Jupiter being dispositor of Saturn at this moment in time. So I feel very much like there's this tension between the need to hold on to physical integrity and at the same time the need for things to dissolve. So it's almost like we need to take our waters into almost like a pool,
Yeah,
where they can be somewhat contained and we can breathe a little bit, and then be prepared for the sea to come in and some of the water washing away and new water coming in,
yeah,
because there's something about us being dissolved during this period.
yes,
Um, but ultimately, we need to remember that that is a very rich field for creation.
absolutely. And also, you know, some of the change might be gentle and almost imperceptible. Like, think of a beach with waves that come up, and let's say it's a fairly shallow slope, so the waves come in very gently, actually, and they lap right up onto the sands, and very gently kind of change things around. And yet the sea can also be crashing on the beach with a big storm. So we might have storms in one way or another, maybe literally, storms within the soul, but it can also be a very gentle water. One could even think of a nice sunny beach with gentle waters lapping on it, you know? I had another thought as I was listening to you, and now it's gone out of my head. That's typical, actually. It dissolved before I could catch it. Oh, I know what it was. So I have a much loved colleague called Darby Costello. She and I have been friends since the middle of the 1980s. And since then, we have been getting together, used to be in person, but I don't live in the same town as her anymore. So now we do it by the phone usually. And brainstorming whatever the current astrology is up to. And last time we spoke, she had this just amazing image to do with Saturn in Pisces. And I hope she won't mind if I share it with you. I'm pretty sure she won't. She'd been using the image of Noah's Ark. So if you recall, this is a biblical story about Noah, who was warned about a great flood that was coming, and was given the task of taking pairs of all the animals, and of course his own family, and of collecting them all up in this absolutely enormous boat, where they would safely survive the primeval flood. And you know, this notion of a primeval flood, I mean, there were episodes like that in actual history. So like there in the collective memory is the memory of the primeval flood. Also looking at it entirely symbolically, you know, each of us is born on the back of the primeval flood of the waters breaking in our mother's womb. So the whole notion of a flood reaches very deep within the soul. But going back to Noah and the ark, when we talked about that, it was so exciting. And then we got onto the theme of, well, you know, imagine being Noah and all of the decisions that he had to make. choosing pairs of animals. Maybe not every species could fit on that ark, and maybe he had to just leave some behind. But even if he didn't, presumably he would have to pick the healthiest specimens of the animals he was trying to save and take them. So there's a lot of serious moral decisions that he would be having to make. Kind of just like now, there's all kinds of moral decisions that meet us at every corner, it seems to me. And I'm kind of old-fashioned in that the radio is my main media. And if I hear something interesting, I'll go and follow it up online. But I've heard so many programs recently that are in one way or another posing or highlighting very thorny moral issues. And I associate that with Jupiter Chiron for sure, you know. But I think that will follow us or follow Saturn into Pisces. And the way we think about those things may be up for change, be dissolved and reformed.
Jupiter isn't going to be in Aries for very long. However, the moon's nodes, the north node is about to shift.
Yes, that's right.
Into Aries. What do you feel that is about, given what we've been talking about with Chiron being in Aries and Jupiter, and then we have the nodes going into Aries, and I do believe we in the UK, our country is about to go through a lunar return, the lunar node return.
Okay.
So what's your feeling about this?
So I would follow on from what you said about the wound with Chiron in Aries, and almost the feeling of lack of agency and how one responds to that. I wanted to add in, actually, when you were saying that, that one way typically that people respond to a feeling of impotence or lack of agency is to overcompensate and to become gratuitously violent or aggressive. And often what is behind that is a really painful sense of lack of agency and lack of personal power, you know. So having the North Node in Aries reminds me a bit of that, because I often think of the North Node as where our journey takes us, where we're really breaking new ground, where we don't feel much of a precedent just from what we've been given by our parental legacy, or maybe our ancestry, or even by society. We don't feel that we have much ground there at the North Node. So it's often a place of effort or something that we have to work towards to develop. It's got a feeling of newness and going beyond the limitations of the past, etc. And so it chimes right in, I feel. And also with the South Node being in Libra, that can be about people pleasing, taking our cue too much from other people. Now, taking other people into account in a harmonious and responsible way is, of course, that's amongst the gifts of the sign, which is ruled by Venus. But it can also manifest as too much mirroring of other people at our own expense. So finding the balance where there's a we that consists of an I and a thou that are in equality, whatever the details of that are. And, you know, a kind of distortion of that will be like the line of least resistance. And always, I think, the nodal axis I don't think of it as a straight line across the horoscope from the past to the future. That was a common thing that used to be written about. I don't see that as realistic if you really observe what happens. I like to think of it as a lemniscate. Now, I should have prepared this. Probably most of you watching know what a lemniscate is. But if you don't, and you're on YouTube now, you might just Google that word, lemniscate, and see the wondrous things that will turn up for you. But how I like to describe it too, it's lemniscate is like, if you imagine you have a thin strip of paper like that, and you bring the ends around and join them. So then you've got a circle, and there are two surfaces, inside and outside, okay? A lemniscate would be if you turn one of those ends over, and then miraculously you only have one surface. And if you look at it sideways on, you've got a figure of 8. Wonderful, wonderful shape. To me, that's the shape that describes the nodal axis. So it is actually only one surface, right? So there is a unified complementarity with those opposites that kind of merge one into the other. And so the North Node Libra, North Node Aries will have South Node Libra. And so we could elaborate a little on that and say that this is something about the balance between personal agency and personal power and direction, and the whole theme of equality. Also interesting to look at how we view ourselves. That would be like a good Aries self-reflection is, what are the parts of ourselves that we value? That's the Libra. And what are the parts that we don't value? That kind of subtle dismissal, a kind of internal rejection. So where and how we do that inside ourselves, that will very likely be mirrored in our relationships and the kind of people that we don't like or don't secretly don't even respect, you know?
And, just thinking about that Libra side of things in terms of what we value, too often with Libra, the temptation is to define value through the eyes of others.
Exactly.
And I was just thinking about, in fact, a conversation I was having with a new client for therapy, Libra, and she only values herself dependent on how much she is validated by others. And so here we have that Libra Aries dynamic. Aries couldn't give a stuff about what anybody thinks. It's completely the opposite in that respect. It's really, that's what you think of me? Okay, bye. I'm off. I really couldn't care less what you think. This is what I'm going to do. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. And quite honestly, Libra could use, and you were talking about that beautiful figure 8, and it would be so lovely to infuse a little bit of Aries into Libra and a little bit of Libra into Aries. And I think you're quite right. It is the most constructive way of thinking about the nodes, because it's the beauty of each sign informing the other that will temper it from its biggest extremes or from its most extreme ends. Because this conversation I have had with so many Libras, where it's the mirror. The mirror is what defines who they are, and the mirror is held up by another person. So I'm only going to take care of myself in order to preserve an appearance, a particular appearance that I know is going to determine whether or not I'm going to say palatable rather than appealing
Yes.
to somebody else.
Yes.
And the rest of me, it doesn't matter because nobody else is going to see that. It's a bit like cleaning your house only when you know guests are coming.
Yes.
And that is no way to live, because that is not about valuing yourself. And so I think, given what we've been talking about, agency and the suppression of agency that we've been living through with Pluto in Capricorn, suddenly I'm looking at the changes that are coming, and I'm looking at Jupiter first, then the North Node, and let's throw Pluto into in Aquarius into the mix. And I think we're looking at a real movement to mindful agency, I'm going to call it.
Yes.
I don't think Pisces is going to allow us to be mindless and selfish
Yes.
in that extreme side of Aries. I don't think that's going to happen. It is the last sign and the first sign plus Aquarius that we're talking about. So I don't think there's any room here for selfishness, but nor is there any room for slavishness either.
Yeah.
So I'm quite encouraged by this.
Well put.
It is a very unique time, I think.
Yes, and just at the moment, with both Saturn and Pluto changing signs this very month, and also the emphasis still on Aries and then Pisces. There's so much about endings and beginnings, end stages and preparation for the new, end stage in terms of needing to process and let go of some old things, simple things even like declutter one's desk or house or whatever, and open the space for the new to come in. It's a bit of an in-between time in a sense at the moment, but with energy, actually, it seems moving really quite fast now, really picking up momentum.
Well, many of us kind of woke up one morning in March 2020 and didn't recognize the world. And most of us are still wondering what happened to the world. What happened? And there's that feeling of, and you're talking about this in-between space, there is this feeling of, am I dreaming?
Yeah.
Am I dreaming? Is this really going on?
Yeah, exactly.
That really happen?
Yeah.
And all the while, the threat that things will never return, the freedoms that we had will never return. And in fact, by the way, here's something for you to think about. We dictate, we tell you what your rights are based on how good a boy or girl you've been.
Yes.
So this is a very menacing Father Christmas that we've got presented in front of us. And some of us can see it, and some of us are trying to pretend it's not happening, and others can't see it at all. But I think most people are aware of it, and they're just hoping it will go away. So this is the situation we currently find ourselves in. And that feeling of unreality that you're kind of talking about is very much there. We've got Saturn coming into Pisces, and I'm wondering how much reality we are going to see. What's going to happen? Are we going to redefine what reality is to suit those who hold the strings of power? Or
exactly. And I guess so sorry to interrupt you there. I just thought you know, the question of who is it that is defining our reality?
Exactly. And
You know?
and what is going to happen is Saturn going to suddenly give everybody a reality check. So rather than it being that feeling of, oh well, maybe it's this and maybe it's that, and there's this ambiguity, Saturn comes along and goes, no, there is such a thing as truth, and let's have a look at let's just look through this big pile of whoopsies that have been left on our doorstep and see what the truth is in the middle of this. So
Yeah.
I'm curious as to how this is going to play out. I think it'll probably play out in all its myriad of possibilities at
Yeah,
once.
very likely. And you know, just thinking of Chiron in Aries, I mean, so far, considering that it, you know, it went into Aries in February of 2019, and it wasn't long after that we were in the pandemic, as it's so called. So in a way, the Chiron element there is the elephant in the room, because history will look back on this time, which will be defined by the pandemic. So all manner of complicated issues to do with health and the experience of ill health, lack of health, and also how health and its issues became politicized and even like weaponized during this period of time.
Bodily
Also happened in the previous two,
ah,
because there was the great Spanish flu epidemic, so-called, when Chiron was in Aries in World War One, and then there was the Vietnam War, and one of the features of the end part of that war, when the resolve was breaking down and all kinds of information was being released, for example, about Agent Orange and the level of injury that was actually happening in the war. And now Chiron in Aries, and we've got the pandemic.
we
As
do. And bodily autonomy,
yeah,
the
exactly.
topic of our time.
Yeah,
Bodily autonomy. And whether we're talking about the right to determine what is put into our bodies from a pharmaceutical perspective, to the idea that we're going to be chipped. Whatever we're talking about, this is also about bodily autonomy.
yeah,
These are there is no bigger boundary than the boundary between our skin and the outside world.
yes, absolutely.
And so here we have this question of our own personal physical integrity, and whether treaties that have been signed in the past to protect that are still being respected, whether they should still be respected. And I think these are big issues, and they're very, very Aries, and they're so Chiron.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Well, I do hope that we have managed to strike a tone of optimism for everyone watching, because perhaps this is also the time when we find our courage and we find our voice. And I like the idea that Pisces and Aquarius with Aries perhaps will bring out the best in each sign together. And I think on that note, I am going to thank you so much for such an insightful and inspiring conversation, as always, Melanie.
Well, thank you, Anna. It's always just a pleasure to speak with you, really.
If people want to know more about what you are doing, how do they do that, Melanie?
From my website, where there is an events section. And then also I do occasionally produce newsletters, which I send out, and you can subscribe to that from the homepage of my website. And that's completely free. I don't write a regular thing every month like some heroic people do. I basically write when something captivates my interest or when I feel I have something I want to share. So it can be a bit irregular. And then, like the proverbial buses, they can all come at once. That's what's happening at the moment. But sometimes there's quite long gaps. But I do write, and there's usually a mix of, news about events, of stuff I'm up to, and usually an article about something topical and so forth. And so you're very welcome to join that list.
I know exactly what you mean about writing when you feel inspired. I'm exactly the same. I can't just write.
I can't do it to order, as it were.
No, no, I can't do that either. It has to be something that piques my interest, and then I'm off. So it's always fun when that happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to do it.
Well, once again, Melanie, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. And I will be putting a link to your website in the description box, and hopefully people will find that and then get your newsletters when they arrive in your mind.
Well, it's for me to thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation. What a lovely thing to be able to do. Thank you so much.
A real joy. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at sacred oils and astrology. In the meantime, do remember to check out my own website if you are wanting to learn more about astrology. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye-bye.